Okay, so in this video, I am going to talk about the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, right? And the debate is always over, what was the original meaning of the Second Amendment? That's that's typically what the debate centers around. Some people say, oh, well, typically they set it up such that the original meaning was to defend yourself from a tyrannical government, and then they say, oh, that's passe, right? That's anachronistic, right? That's not a legitimate concern, right? But the thing is, I have my own special brand of uh, constitutional jurisprudence, right? I have a video about it. It's called The Originalist Living, Breathing Constitutional Jurisprudence, right? Because I'm just not satisfied with what's available, so I came up with my own. And basically, the deal is that I care what the people who made the Constitution think. Right? I care about the impulse that led to the creation of the Constitution, and that impulse was transmitted through the people that made it. And so, really, the question is, what would those people tell us? Right? It's not really a question of what was the original meaning of what was written, and what they would tell us in the first place. Just to give you, I have a video about it, but just a quick summary. But what the founders would tell us in the first place is that we should consider Plato and Aristotle, right? Because we have to give them some time to get caught up on everything that's happened in the meantime. And once the founders get caught up, that's what I believe, that they would tell us to consider Plato and Aristotle. I have a video about it. And so then we would bring Plato and Aristotle to the current year and ask them, well, what do you think? And they would say, well, you should probably consider the founders, right? Your founders are pretty dope, right? So it seems like we're at an impasse at that point, but really we just have to consider a particular issue. We're only at an impasse in theory, right? And jurisprudence is about practice, actually. And today we're considering the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment, the founders, would tell us to keep it. Our reasons are different than their reasons for the Second Amendment, right? But that's fine. Like the founders would say, they would say that we are out of our mind to weaken the Second Amendment just because our reasons are different from theirs. Okay, Plato and Aristotle too, and I am going to talk about that a little bit here today. And so the first reason is cop hatred. Okay. As a society, we hate the cops, but we want only the cops to have guns. Right? It's quite a strange situation. Some of the people that hate the cops the most are the ones that are also opposed to guns the most. Some of them. And, there's the left and the right. And this is really the issue right here, is that the left wants police to punish people for crime. They don't want to stop people from committing crimes, right? Their standard is the crime has to happen in the first place, and then the police can act, right? And, I'm going to explain it. When put that way, it seems somewhat reasonable. But the thing is, not everywhere and everyone needs to be policed the same, right? Some areas need more policing than others. And cops are not so oblivious, right? Cops have some idea of where crimes will happen, right? They know where they should be, right? Like if a cop wants to, like speed traps are a good example, right? Like cops know where people will speed, right? And I despise speed traps. I'm not advocating speed traps. But just as cops know where people will speed, cops know where other crimes will happen. Right? But the thing is, the left, see, this is what's known as broken windows policing, right? When you go and you just hold it down, right? And you're like we're going to prevent crime. That's broken windows policing, okay? But the left considers broken windows policing to be racist, right? Because it's a sad fact, the sketchiest people in the country are young black men. So if what we're going to do is go out there and prevent crime from happening, then there will be a disproportionate effort to police young black men. And so the left says that anything that's disproportionate with regard to race is racist, right? And people will say, oh no, that's just a myth that young black men are the sketchiest people. I'm here to tell you, no, it isn't. I could get into it another time. But it's not just a myth, right? It's the truth. And yes, I know, I agree with Tupac. I didn't choose the thug life. The thug life chose me. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't deal with thugs. It doesn't mean that thugs should just be allowed to run free. That's not what that means. They should still be dealt with as thugs, and we should have sympathy for them in general. But we shouldn't just allow them to commit crimes and punish them afterwards, because luckily, if sketchy people are well policed, then what happens is they are busted for lesser crimes. Right? If we wait for them to do what they'll do, then they're busted for greater crimes, and they will spend more time in prison. But if we police them well, then we will bust them for lesser crimes, and they will spend less time in prison. So this relates to the Second Amendment because it's conceivable that the cop haters, mostly the left, but not exclusively, it's conceivable that the cop haters will have power one day, and they will, go too far, making sure that cops don't stop crime. Right? And then it will be up to us to defend ourselves, and it won't be a good argument to say, oh, well, only the cops should have guns. Right? That's a very real possibility. We all know how viral or pervasive cop hatred is. So, you can't rule it out. All right? People hate the cops, and that ought to be a sufficient reason for the Second Amendment, right? Because the cops, politics may one day weaken the cops to that extent, right? Now, of course, we could say that would be an example of the government becoming tyrannical, and that's why we need the Second Amendment. And I don't strictly disagree with that, but it's like an indirect tyranny, isn't it? It's not the same kind of tyranny that the Second Amendment originally envisioned. Obviously, So, reason number 2. Our society faces some kind of doom, right? This is the threat other than law enforcement. People take the permanent existence of our society for granted, right? And they do it because this is a first world society, and all that's in their view are first world problems, but actually it's quite likely that our society faces some kind of doom. And if we were to ever go through that doom, then similarly, we wouldn't have any cops, right? This sort of doom, is the other threat to law enforcement, right? Like if government ceases to operate correctly, then we won't have law enforcement, and we'll need to defend ourselves. And it'd be pretty sweet if, in the meantime, we hadn't had our ability to defend ourselves taken away from us. Now, I'm going to make a video about the various kinds of doom that our society may face, right? I'm not going to get all into it here. But there are plenty of reasons to take seriously the idea that our society is doomed, it faces some kind of doom, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't doomed. But the idea should be taken seriously, right? Well, we can only know in retrospect. But what people do is they pretty much rely on the promise of technology, right? Like, to the extent, people think of it at all, it's like, oh, it's the future, right? We live in a scientific era. We have technology. And then they say, oh, the only doom we could face is climate change, right? And, climate change is way overrated. The doom that we face from that. I have a video about that. You can look through my videos. I'm not talking about climate change. I'm talking about things like, the power grid. There's only, I don't know what it is, 3 or 4 power grids for the whole country, right? and they're vulnerable. There's public debt, federal, state, local levels. Okay, that's a big deal. All right, there are governments in our country that are doomed because of debt. There's entitlements. There's Medicaid. There's all these things, and it's completely questionable that they are sustainable. Right? They're politically unsustainable. Right? Not environmentally unsustainable. There's foreign countries. Right? Foreign countries face doom. Right? United States is one of the least doomed countries, maybe the least doomed country on earth, because it's like the country of last resort, right? Like whenever one country is in trouble, all of the capital leaves that country and comes here because this is the badass country. So for that reason, we're kind of the least doomed country. But that being said, a country like China, China's not really looking that good, people. China's a pretty big deal. You think that China can face doom without bringing us down with it? Probably not. Those are just some examples. But yeah, people just think that, like, oh, it's the future. Oh, it's the first world. Oh, society's perpetual. But that's totally questionable, right? And if we ever have to confront a less than first world situation, we will be happy that we didn't disarm all of it ourselves. Because there's a lot of sketchy people, right? So that's another reason for the Second Amendment. So the point is, in general, that I'm not really interested in the original meaning of the Second Amendment, right? I want to do what is right today, right? And I think that the founders were sophisticated. They were more sophisticated at political thought than we are. So I think we should ask them. And if we did, I think they would, ultimately think it through and recommend those even more superior political thinkers, Plato and Aristotle. Right? So I think we should ask them. Right? And they would say that we should keep the so-called right to bear arms for the reasons that I've said. Right? And like I said, they would tell us that we are out of our mind to weaken the Second Amendment just because our reasons are different from theirs. Okay? So anyway, yeah. We need to step up our game on this Second Amendment debate here. It's so superficial. Oh my gosh, I can hardly even stand it. And even constitutional jurisprudence. It's like there's the living, breathing, and there's originalism. Right? It's like, no, we need both of them. Okay, the worst thing about the living, breathing Constitution is really that there are absurd decisions, and that we rely on ourselves for making these decisions, whereas we should ask these historical figures. All right, so Second Amendment good, Founders good, Plato and Aristotle. All right, let's call it a day. Thank you very much.